Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're strapping in for a structured, kind of detective-style investigation into literally one of the most terrifying and frustrating dashboard warnings you can ever encounter in a modern performance vehicle, especially if you're driving a GM model or a Cadillac like the CTS-V. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this, because we are going to crack the code on the dreaded service suspension and service StabiliTrak errors. So if you've ever felt that absolute panic of your dashboard suddenly lighting up like a Christmas tree, you are exactly in the right place. Let's get into it.
Picture this, right? You're just driving along, enjoying the ride, and out of nowhere, a chime rings out. Your dash illuminates with a massive service suspension system warning. Instantly, the car feels like it's fighting you. Your suspension becomes rock solid, just completely bouncing over every tiny pebble. Your steering might feel incredibly heavy or off-center, and you might even hit an electronic speed limiter that rigidly caps you at 80 miles per hour. No way around it. It's a terrifying handling imbalance. But hey, take a deep breath. I completely empathize with that sinking feeling, but I'm here to reassure you that we can find the root cause of all this chaos, and honestly, it might be way simpler than you think.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our investigative roadmap for today. First, anatomy of the error. 2, the data conflict. 3, suspect 1, the wiring. 4, suspect 2, the sensors. And finally, 5, diagnosis and repair steps.
Section 1, anatomy of the error. The cascading failure.
So what's actually going on here is that a single fault triggers an absolute domino effect across the whole car. You don't just get a suspension light, StabiliTrak completely disables itself. Your steering might suddenly pull hard to one side, kind of mimicking a terribly botched alignment, and the vehicle enters a really restrictive limp mode, locking you at that 80-mile-per-hour limit. This all happens because the car is entering a fail-safe mode. When it loses data, it essentially panics and defaults to maximum firmness on the shocks just to ensure the car stays level, which creates that awful stiff ride.
The whole foundation of this issue lies in the incredible engineering of magnetic ride control, or MRC. This system is a real game changer because it adjusts damping every single millisecond. It uses electromagnetic coils and this specialized fluid inside the shocks to instantly firm up or soften the ride based on exactly what the road is doing. But because it requires a constant, ultra-fast stream of data to make those split-second decisions, a sudden loss of that data causes the system to, well, basically throw a fail-safe tantrum.
Moving right along to Section 2, the data conflict, the brain and the eyes.
Think of your car's suspension control module and electronic brake control module as a highly advanced but honestly easily confused brain. This brain relies entirely on wheel sensors and suspension sensors as its eyes. If just one of those sensors breaks or disconnects, a whole corner of the car is suddenly totally blind. And when the brain can't see what that specific wheel is doing, it panics. It might even erroneously trigger active braking through the ABS pump, which literally fights your inputs and makes your steering wheel feel completely off-center.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the direct conflict between your car's critical sensors. Imagine the steering angle sensor on the left is telling the brain, hey, the driver is turning the wheel. But the wheel speed sensors on the right are reporting, wait, no, all four wheels are traveling at the exact same speed we're going straight. This conflict tells the computer that you must be in an uncontrollable skid. So what does it do? It instantly disables the StabiliTrak system to prevent it from trying to correct a skid that isn't actually happening. It's wild.
All right, Section 3. Let's look at Suspect 1, the wiring.
Now, before we go blindly throwing expensive parts at a car, we always check the manufacturer's own documentation. GM Service Bulletin PI0430C clearly outlines that a service suspension system message can simply be caused by an electrical connector not being fully seated. Look, presenting this data is absolutely crucial because it validates that this is a recognized manufacturing vulnerability. It gives us immense credibility to take a DIY diagnostic approach rather than just instantly assuming the super expensive shock absorbers are blown.
If you look at the physical location of the module and its wire harnesses, you'll see the wiring running near the wheel wells is incredibly vulnerable. Over time, and especially on lowered cars, these harnesses can rub against the chassis. Or they just become super brittle from years of intense engine heat and constant vibration.
So the real trick here is understanding exactly how these connections fail physically. Right on top of the front struts, there are these infamous 90-degree shock connectors, and they really have three major failure points. First, the female connector pins can spread apart, which means they lose contact intermittently whenever you hit a bump. Second, the thin pigtail wiring right behind the connector can fray. The internal copper strands break from all that heat and vibration, even while the outside plastic insulation looks completely fine. Actually, scratch that. Sometimes you can't see the damage at all until you really dig in. And third, if moisture gets inside the connector, the little green insulator can corrode or misalign, completely preventing the plug from seating properly.
Which brings us to Section 4. Suspect 2. The sensors. And this brilliantly illustrates how a tiny part causes a massive, terrifying failure. Our next suspect is the front ride height sensor, which is mounted right in the wheel well. Attached to its bracket is this tiny plastic linkage arm. That little rod connects down to a ball stud on the control arm. If you hit a massive pothole, or honestly, if the plastic just gets old and brittle, this $10 linkage can snap right off. The second that happens, the car loses track of its ride height on that corner entirely, and boom, it defaults to that awful, jarring limp mode.
So, you might be wondering, how do we actually know if it's a sensor linkage or a real physical mechanical problem? Well, here is a great little triage test. If you jack up the car and wiggle the tire from the top and bottom, the 12 and 6 o'clock positions, and there's play, you've got a worn hub bearing. If you wiggle it from the sides, 3 and 9, it's likely a worn tie rod. But if the wheel is perfectly tight and there are zero mechanical vibrations, yet your dashboard is still screaming at you, you need to look straight into that wheel well for a missing ball stud or a dangling ride height sensor arm that's causing a strict data failure.
Finally, Section 5. Diagnosis and repair steps. Let's fix this thing. Okay, the very first step of our investigation requires the right magnifying glass, so to speak. A standard, cheap OBD-T scanner you bought online is just not going to cut it here. Those really only read generic engine codes. To get the actual story from the suspension and brake modules, you absolutely must use a tool capable of pulling chassis codes, often referred to as C-type codes. That's a real game changer for this fix. So here is your diagnostic action plan. First, scan for those C codes. You're looking specifically for a C0710 for a steering angle fault or somewhere in the C0035 through C0050 range for wheel speed sensor issues. Second, grab a flashlight and visually inspect those plastic linkages and ball studs on the control arms we just talked about. Third, try the lock-to-lock steering reset. You start the car in park, turn the steering wheel all the way to the left stop, then all the way to the right stop, and back to center. That recalibrates the sensor. And finally, check the wiring harness on the front hubs right behind the rotor for any melting or fraying. Now, if your detective work leads you back to those 90-degree shock connectors from earlier, here is the repair procedure. But hold on, don't rush to buy parts right away. First, try cleaning the bad connector with contact cleaner and applying just a tiny dab of dielectric grease. Second, use a tiny dental pick to gently tension those female pins closer together so they grip tighter. Now, if and only if the wiring is visibly frayed or broken inside the insulation, move to step 3. Snip the factory plug and solder in a replacement MagRide repair pigtail, like the AC Delco PT2325. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a crucial thought. When your dash lights up, the car handles terribly, and the speed is strictly limited, human instinct is to just assume the absolute worst. We're talking dropping $1,000 or way more on brand new MagRide shocks. But to put that into perspective, as we've seen today, those catastrophic, terrifying symptoms are very often the result of literally a $10 broken plastic linkage, or just a single loose wire causing a simple data conflict. It's crazy, right? Always remember to investigate the cheap, accessible solutions before tearing apart your suspension. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time on The Explainer.